So we're going to be going through this morning a Control-Alt-Delete of medicine. That is the digital era arriving finally to this very important area. But before I do that, let's just warm up with this kind of adoption of technology. I adopted this economist's recent graph to show how many years it took for technology to be adapted by a fourth of Americans. And you can see electricity was over 40. You see telephone, and you go all the way over to mobile phone, and it was actually it was actually 13 years. And you get to the smartphone, and it took 2 years to get to a fourth of Americans adapting it. The fastest technology in history of technology for adoption. So these little devices have changed our whole lives, of course, our daily lives, and so much of what we do is really connected to these devices. But what's interesting is they all evolved in a very short period of time of just really 8.5 years, from the iPod through smartphones, e-readers, and tablets. And that short period of time gives you a sense of how much impact can be felt with a new technology that has that much extraordinary adoption. So these devices now have, in fact, induced, because of our surgically connected features, a new species of man known as Homo distractus. And what's interesting about this, I asked the Twitterverse about Homo distractus. I said, well, the average attention span had dropped from 12 minutes in '98 to 5 minutes in 2008. What is it now? And I got a remarkably rapid response in a nanosecond. And it says, what was the question? So these devices have had a lot of impact. And of course, most of us here are digital immigrants, not so many digital natives in the group. And you know, this whole digital world starts at a very young age. But I thought that was kind of young. And then I realized that that was only the beginning of it, because this is really young. So wow. And then I saw this. I said, wow, now we're talking about young. So we struggle with this in medicine because most of us are digital immigrants. I don't know if you know this, but in U.S. physicians, 55% are over the age of 55 years. So that talks a little bit about why there's some of the issues about resistance. So now let's get into the digital features that will transform the future of medicine, and they basically come down to 6 characters: 0, 1, A, C, T, and G, the nucleotides of the genome. And when you have those for each human being fully defined, you have the medical essence of a human being. So today we practice medicine at a population level. Everything we do in medicine, essentially, in terms of screening, prescriptions, diagnosis, it's all done at this population level, which is so imprecise and remarkably wasteful. So, example, mammography. This is the latest one. You could use many different examples, but mammography, this is a recent article last month, or actually in February, about the large study, the largest study follow-up of mammograms. And you probably know this, but there was no difference whatsoever in outcomes. And this was 90,000 women serially studied with mammography over 25 years. More recently, there was this study in JAMA just last week, where it went over every study ever done with mammography, and it showed that if 10,000 women undergo this screening procedure over 10 years, there's a net harm. And in fact, the accompanying editorial quantified this, that of these 10,000 women, 5 of the 10,000 would benefit, and 9,995 women would not benefit, and of those, 6,000 would be harmed. And that's the state of medicine today. Incredibly imprecise, and it doesn't individualize anything. And so this book by Tyler Cowen is great because it has nothing to do with medicine, but on the other hand, it has everything to do about medicine. Average is over. And it's over because we have the new tools of digitizing human beings to get us to this individualized medicine capability, which is really exciting. In fact, it's the biggest shakeup coming, it's just starting now, in the history of medicine. So those of you who really want to delve into this in more depth than I have this morning can turn to this article, which is Open Access and Cell, just published a little over a week ago. It's an article I put out to all this stuff together about from pre-womb to tomb, the individualized medicine. And we're going to talk about a couple of aspects of it, the human GIS and this panoramic approach, take off from the word panorama, about understanding each human being. You're very familiar with a geographic information system. This, of course, is the most classic one in common use is the Google map, where you look at multi-dimensional information, layered information, whether it's the traffic view, the street view, the satellite view, and you put all that information together and integrate it. Well, we can do that now in a human being because we now have the social graph, the sensors, the imaging, and then all the different omics. And that includes the exposome, which is the environmental story, which we can quantify now with sensors to a great degree. So with that GIS of a human being, let's start off with the Facebook and the social graph, because that really, that is a term that Mark Zuckerberg came up with, and it's quite apropos, and it actually encompasses things like your personalized health record. But if we just look at Facebook alone, Stephen Wolfram has shown the extraordinary amount of demographic data one can get from each person through their archived Facebook registration. But beyond that, there is an interesting trend, which you may be well aware of, is that all the social networking has gone mobile. Except for the fuddy-duddies on LinkedIn, all the other ones are at least 70, 80% mobile. So this is really interesting because this is now, of course, accounting for things like the Arab Spring, and this is the Egypt portion of the Arab Spring, Wael Ghonem's book. And the cover of this book summarizes the whole story about the power of people is greater than the people in power. And remember that as far as the future of medicine and healthcare, how it will change. But because of sharing emotions, videos, pictures, ideas through social networking and these digital tools, this, of course, can bring people together like never before. But there's a downside to this, and that is the security and privacy of the data, and that is you can get so much information from somebody's mobile device. And so this is, of course, part of this flip side of the data-driven society, and it's very well captured by this particular cartoon. A little boy says to Obama, "Dad says you're monitoring all our phone calls." And Obama has a great response, "He's not your dad." So we need to get over that problem. That is a serious problem, well captured by this. All right, let's move on to the sensors, because that's obviously relative to the Scanadu Scout and so many things that are really particularly exciting in medicine. This started, of course, the wearables with the health and fitness area, and it's only now, in recent times, that it's getting into the true medical space. But these devices, how many of you have one of these wireless accelerometers? Yeah, very high proportion. How many of you are still actively using them? I think a lot less, yeah. So these are the front runners of this digital wearable revolution. And of course, these don't work very well. I don't know if you saw the New York Times had a whole Science Times issue dedicated to the accuracy of these accelerometers, these wireless accelerometers, and they didn't perform very well for lots of different reasons. If you're interested, refer you back to that Science Times. Now there are devices to track your sleep. They go to your posture, so you can wear this around your waist and know whether your posture is not right. And they even go to things like you're brushing your teeth, so your dentist will know for sure. And then finally, there's even a fork that will gauge how much you're eating and how fast and how many times you chew each bite. These are really anything you could think of with respect to health and fitness. We're seeing a lot of different ads and apps, or what I call adapters. And so you have the electrodermal sensation of galvanic skin response and heart rate variability, and the ability for a modern mood ring, that is, capturing data that supports these metrics that would go along with stress. There's even some first passes about being able to capture your caloric information, how much you're eating with each meal or snack. And these, of course, have not been shown to be accurate yet, but they're very interesting beginnings in this area. And this is particularly interesting, a device that you can point to your food and give you this, the actual ingredients through spectroscopy. So now let's go from the health side, the lifestyle, to the true medical. And there's just about every chronic condition of man, there's a set of sensors that could really change, and some of them are already changing, radically how we approach each of these conditions, not just for the better management, but also their prevention. So I'm a cardiologist. Most of my patients have high blood pressure, and almost every one of them now is using a wireless device blood pressure, which captures all their blood pressures, get a whole lot more. They still have to press start, but it's great because then they can send me a single screenshot with all their data, and they know what's going on. They have the context of when their blood pressure is not right. And also, of course, the same thing for glucose. You can do a glucometer right through the device of the smartphone with a little microfluidic ad. And of course, now you can do a electrocardiogram, two different devices, one of which actually gives an immediate algorithmic reading of the electrocardiogram, which is particularly nice. And I found out the other side of that is I had an email, this was the attachment, the subject line from a patient who I had given this device, and the subject line said, "I'm in atrial fibrillation, now what do I do?" So I said, wow, we've really moved to a whole new era in medicine. There was recently a study, just last week, published from Australia, where 1,000 people just walked into the drugstore with no history of arrhythmia and just put their fingers on this device, and 15 of these people had unknowingly were in atrial fibrillation, which is a setup for stroke. So, and just think if they were being monitored beyond just a spot reading. So this is really an interesting type of device that, of course, will be used a lot to detect occult arrhythmias that are significant. We've also shown that the Holter monitor, which has been around from Norman Holter since 1949, is basically been overridden by a Band-Aid that captures every heartbeat for 2 weeks, that just is sent to the patient in a little box and sent back, kind of like the Netflix of heart monitoring, far better than the Holter monitor with all the wires that you can't take a shower or exercise. And then, of course, there's the ability to do an oxygen saturation in the blood through a smartphone. These are all single ways to do this, which, of course, could be integrated with another, of course, very hyper-innovative device that you'll hear more about, the Scanadu Scout from Walter subsequently. Now let's go to the watches, because there's a lot of hype with the watches. A few recent entries to this space from the likes of Samsung and Qualcomm, and an imminent one from Apple. And so these watches purport to have a lot of medical information. And so what's interesting is you don't even have to have a watch that tells time. You could have one that will predict a seizure before it happens, which of course is really important for someone with an epilepsy condition. There's also a clunky watch that gets all vital signs continuously, highly accurately, which has already been FDA approved for hospital use, to change the regular rooms of a hospital to ones that can capture this ICU-like information instead of the single visit by a nurse or an assistant once a shift, to have continuous monitoring. So the ICU on a wrist concept, which looks like this when it goes to your phone. So just think, this is technically doable today, where you can check your email, surf the web, and look at all your vital signs continuously. That's interesting, isn't it? So there's a necklace that gets cardiac output in stroke volume with every heartbeat for people who have heart failure to prevent readmission potentially, and even things like this sock that will monitor vital signs of a newborn or a baby, as well as a sock that would monitor the pressure for diabetic with neuropathy or a foot ulcer. There's also ways to use tiles to get seniors to be able to avoid falling and to help in patients with Parkinson's disease. And there's things that you wear, like a contact lens, which can be changed to a pressure sensing for glaucoma. It's already approved in Europe for people with severe glaucoma, which talks to one's smartphone. And of course, you've heard about how Google is working on, the head of the Google Glass project was recruited with the quid pro quo that he could continue his work on the glucose sensing of a contact lens through tears. Then there's breath, which is incredibly rich, and it hasn't been harnessed until the smartphone era. And so what's interesting is you can get lung function, you can detect when someone is using an inhaler and a hot spot for asthma, but you can also hopefully prevent an asthma attack and even diagnose cancer. That to me was the most surprising aspect of this. You probably know about this, but dogs can smell cancer. And what's fascinating, because they have such an endowment of olfactory receptors, so unlike human beings. So now we have an electronic nose that can attach to the smartphone to simulate a dog's ability to smell cancer. And what's fascinating, now there's a few different companies. We're evaluating one of these in a prospective clinical trial. And so you can pick up the organic chemicals like alkenes that are present in the cancer state through the breath. And who would have ever thought that would be possible? You can also, of course, use the breath to gauge the person's stress level, but that's, of course, a whole lot less technical, doesn't require particularly advanced analytics. The voice is the other rich area that is now being used, and the voice has a single metric for detecting the state of mind or mood of a person, their stress level. And there's an Israeli company that's working on this beyond Wearable. And you can diagnose Parkinson's disease with 99% accuracy just through the voice. So this is pretty striking. And of course, I mentioned that you can use sensors to quantify one's environmental exposures, including UV light and radiation and all sorts of other things. And there's lots of different entries in that area. Now we're moving from edible sensors like Proteus that is headquartered not far from here, that has a digestible pill with a chip in it to monitor adherence, to embeddable sensors in the bloodstream. We'll talk about that in a second. And there's very hot new sensors that, like, for example, skin chips that can just be placed directly on the skin that are even biodegradable batteries that can be used. So these are recent entries into the new sensor space. This is a track and treat skin chip, which was worked on from Korea, just published. And this is a microfluidic skin chip from the work of John Rogers, the University of Illinois Urbana, which was just published last week, which can capture electrocardiogram, EEG, and EMG, muscle wave signals, and it's really quite an ingenious, again, innovative device. But all these devices need to be validated, and that's what we have been doing. One of the big things that we do at Scripps is go into prospective, rigorous clinical trials, because the hype that has surrounded things like robotics and the proton beam, which were never validated, put us in a very difficult situation. And on the other hand, the promise here, which was captured nicely by this Inc. article about this $1 trillion cure. That is, if this stuff clicks, we're talking about at least a third of reduction in our healthcare expenditures, as was really worked through in this very nice review of the state of digital medicine. Now, when you have these tools, you basically take out all these icons of medicine, like hospitals, the office visit, the way we do labs, the way we do a physical exam with the classic stethoscope, and what we have conceived as the medical metrics of today. So let's say they're all going to change, and they're going to change in a drastic fashion. Let's first talk about the edifice complex. The edifice complex is a very interesting one. You see all these big hospitals, buildings being built, and in the cover of HHN, a big industry magazine on hospitals, just came out a couple of days ago. It talks about, well, what should be this building in the future? Because it isn't going to be a hospital as you know it today. Why would you have a hospital, which is the antechamber to the tomb, as George Orwell said in 1946, and it hasn't changed in any measurable way since then? 1 out of 4 people are harmed in the hospital. And this is really, obviously, exceptionally costly. So now we have envisioned these beautiful, slick, futuristic hospital rooms. It's kind of crazy because we don't need the hospital room of the future. The only room we need in the hospital is the intensive care unit or the temporary use of an operating room and procedure room. Otherwise, this is all going to be done at the home or on an ambulatory basis. This is Consumer Reports. I don't know if you've seen it. It's the May issue, just came out. Consumer Reports, survive your stay at the hospital. Ratings of almost 2,600 hospitals of the 4,000 in this country. And it basically shows how people are harmed. And what's interesting is, at a rating of 100, the highest rated hospital in the United States is 76. And the cover is break free from cable, but it really should read break free from hospitals. Judge Halverson, the outgoing former CEO of Kaiser, has also said we should get rid of hospitals, except for select, very restricted use, such as the ICU. And the hospital of the future is the home with all these sensors and tools that we've talked about. And this is just one early image of that from a group in Sweden. What about clinics? Do we want to have patients going face-to-face physical visits? What's the average length of time for an office visit in the United States? Anybody? Any guess? How about the fellow who had 1956? That's the only one you got? Okay, 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Average wait time to see the doctor in the United States? 60 minutes. That doesn't work too well. There's a very nice New Yorker article, The Doctor Will See You on Screen, if you haven't seen it recently. This is the length of time for waiting to get an appointment with a primary care doctor. We're talking about 60 plus days if you live in Boston, but nowhere is it less than 2 weeks. So this is a real problem. 70% from the Cisco survey of thousands of Americans would like to have their interactions with a doctor virtually, not physically. We're not listening to the patients. In fact, there's a very nice report just published this morning, about 20 minutes ago, from PricewaterhouseCoopers, which also amplifies that. The point is that office visit, it's been studied, compared to physical visits, virtual, physical, and it's cheaper, and the patients love it. This is a very large study from Virtual, a big Minnesota health insurer, and it showed that the average visit, because of unnecessary testing that's done with a physical visit, was reduced almost $90 on average. Now there's the uberification of our economy, as was recently captured, and this is extending to medicine. It's not just getting a ride as Uber and all these other things. There's doctor on demand, where you just have an app and you just say, in a second, you're talking to the doctor for $40 to get a consult. That's a whole lot quicker than waiting for 60 plus days if you happen to live in Boston. And there's all these other doctor on demand type Uber ways to get to a doctor, and they advertise, you know, the real famous doctors, like if you watch the Doctor Show, there's Travis right there, and of course there's Mehmet Oz and all these other people. And so they're very interesting. This is a field that's cropping up like I've never seen. All these different, even Google Helpouts is getting into this, but all these different companies and startups, some of them are not, but well beyond startups, which are doing medicine virtually on demand. And so where this is headed, I tried to capture it in this tweet about the idea going down to your doctor's office is going to feel as though you're going to the video store, because it's over for going to the doctor's office except for select special circumstances. And of course that will never go away, but not to the point where we have nearly 100% visits like that today. And only in San Francisco I came across this as far as the Uber world. You can now, I thought, well, this is quite striking. You can have your medicines delivered by a drone in the Mission District of San Francisco now. I said, wow. You'll have to pay an extra $100. And I love the tagline, we can't ring the bell, but we'll meet you outside. Anyway, yeah, only San Francisco like this. So I don't know how they got this thing rigged with all the different pharmacies in the Mission District. It's pretty wild. But so the pharmacy is getting into on-demand services, likes which are hard to envision. Now let's talk about the labs. I think you've had this experience. It's a simple stress test. I do your blood work, send it to the lab, and never get back to you with the results. This is classic. This is how almost everyone deals with getting their lab data. They don't get their data, or they beg and grovel to get it. So not far from here, Stanford dropout, Elizabeth Holmes. Seems like these days you have to be a dropout to be successful. I don't know why. But this woman is a fantastic innovator. And she, over the past decade, worked on this project, Theranos, which you may be familiar with, which she challenged the model of the LabCorp, Quest, Central Labs, hospital labs, which has been in existence since the 1960s. So what she has set up is a nanotainer with, you have a finger warmer so you don't really feel even the finger stick because it vasodilates the finger vessels. And then you have this tiny collection of blood in this tiny little tube that can run hundreds of lab tests for a fraction of the price it costs through conventional labs. And I interviewed Elizabeth actually not long ago, and I had these lab tests, and I was shocked. Within minutes, I could get all these results, so quickly. Never had seen that before. That's now going into all Walgreens throughout the country. It's in Palo Alto and several sites in Arizona, and eventually 8,000 plus Walgreens will have a corner where you can get your lab test. That's just the beginning, though, because with microfluidics, we can do this through the smartphone. In fact, you can do almost any lab test now through a smartphone. Not commercially yet available, but soon will be. Thyroid function test, liver function test, kidney function test, you name it. So this is a company that just spun out of the University of Cambridge, which is doing lots of different tests, including infectious diseases for things like HIV, TB, malaria, but all the other conventional lab tests as well. There's also a way to get the blood thinning, if you take things like warfarin or other blood thinners, just by touching the screen on the smartphone with this particular technology, which is quite interesting. And I won't get into the genomics so much because we're really more focused on the wireless side of this with sensors and imaging. We'll talk about imaging though, but I do want to mention that all the genomics pretty much eventually will be moving to the smartphone. And so, for example, these devices can do sequencing of pathogens. So, for example, things like HIV, TB in the field in rural, remote areas. And so you can also use this in a pharmacy to do DNA testing of a particular allele that denotes risk or response to a drug. So we've been talking about lab on a chip and microfluidics. I want to talk a bit about lab in the body. And this is, of course, the next big area, embedded sensors, which we're just starting to see right now. This cartoon captures that a little bit. And basically what we have is this amazing opportunity that you can only get so much from outside the body. And when you start to get in the bloodstream, it gets really particularly exciting. In our cars, we have a whole lot of sensors on average, and we also have the same thing in smartphones, but in our bodies, we have no sensors. No sensors, and that's going to change. I'm not sure we'll have 400 sensors in the short term, but we'll have some. And it won't be everyone, it'll be the people who need it. So for example, we could have prevented the deaths of Tim Russert and James Gandolfini, who had had a workup for a blockage in their arteries, which was negative, and one quite proximal to Tim Russert's fatal heart attack, because these events occur with mild narrowings. But the stress tests only pick up tight narrowings that impede the blood flow. So we don't have a way to know when someone is going to have a heart attack. And now we think we do. So that is, we've been working for the past 6 years collecting the blood in the earliest minutes of people with a heart attack to find the cells that are coming off the lining of the artery from the cracked site. And these cells can be sequenced, single cell sequencing, which we've done, and we have a genomic signal, which can be coupled with an embedded sensor. This is the sensor developed at Caltech. It's smaller than a grain of sand, and that can be put in the blood to pick up when these cells, through a genomic signal, are being sloughed off. And that would be days or weeks before a heart attack. And so this is a collaboration that we've been working on to then work to relay to a smartphone. So here is a clip about that. We're setting up a little sensor that we can put in your bloodstream.
Yes.
That will sense if you're going to have a heart attack days or a couple weeks before and give you a heart attack ringtone on your phone to warn you, prevent the heart attack.
Really?
Yes.
Now there's information. I'm sure that it's going to come down the line that you know, the insurance companies will say, hey, listen, we'll give you a cut if you have a monitor on you, so we can stay healthier. But then they're going to sell that information about your present health to other people, and I'm going to get like a ringtone that says, would you like 20% off on caskets? You know, like, or Crestor or something like that.
It's coming. It's coming. He's scary, quick, and good. And the sad part, he's right about that, too. That's really sad. We'll come back to him in a second. I hope he gets Letterman's job. He's unbelievable. So what about the ability to pick up diabetes, autoimmune diabetes of children? You've got 5 years before the pancreas islet cells are destroyed, and you can sense that through autoantibodies. You can sense tumor DNA in the blood. These are things in the future for people at significant risk or children of significant risk. Now let's get into imaging, because that's another big part of this story, using the smartphone as an imaging device. And it isn't just taking a picture of a skin lesion, but, for example, you can do X-rays through a smartphone. So you think somebody fell, might have a fracture, forget about going to the emergency room, just take a picture, goes to the cloud, you get algorithmic determination of the results of the X-ray. Or you can do an eye exam, including the entire slit lamp eye exam now. Pretty striking. 2 companies that are into this, which are really executing remarkably well. One here, and another one developed at Stanford, extremely low cost. They call it the iPhone, E-Y-E. And it's really pretty remarkable for $90 to do what an ophthalmologist does in their office through a smartphone. So this is a otoscope, very powerful otoscope that you just pop onto the smartphone. And I had a chance to use that to examine Stephen Colbert's eardrum when I visited with him. So let's take a look at that. I saw on Twitter that you had an eardrum.
Yeah, I went diving. I blew out my good eardrum over here.
I thought I could just take a look with the smartphone into your eardrum. Is that all right?
Okay, yeah, sure. I'll just bend over.
No,
Really?
Stay right there. Stay
all right.
There. So basically, I put this right in here.
Yeah.
And I hope I don't hurt you at all.
No, I hope so too. Ow?
That hurt?
No.
Okay. And I've got your eardrum. Right there.
It's an eardrum. It's not my ass. God. By the way, could I get a colonoscopy with this thing?
He's unbelievable. He really is unbelievable. Okay. Now let's talk about the stethoscope, because the stethoscope is the icon of medicine. And it has been for hundreds, almost 200 years. And its history. It's gone to the dogs, as you can see here. This is the high-resolution ultrasound that fits in the pocket better than the stethoscope, but it takes a whole lot better, gets a whole lot better data, and it's all recorded. And now that Harvard has signed on recently with this Stop, Listening, and Look perspective in the New England Journal just a few weeks ago, now it's really been blessed that this is a big point-of-care ultrasound in medical education. The stethoscope is a relic. So I don't know what we're going to do for the new icon of medicine, but it is basically history. You can now, as a cardiologist, do a full echocardiogram. In seconds, you can see everything about the heart. This is a normal heart, a patient of mine. And the images are extraordinary, and you see every aspect of the heart. Why would you listen to lub-dub when you can see everything in seconds? Or a patient with a sick heart, you can see the difference right here. You can even track blood flow, the valves, the size of the chambers, the strength of the heart muscle, everything in seconds. It should be part of the physical exam. I haven't used a stethoscope to examine a patient's heart in 4 years. So this is another stunning fact. In the US, we do 125 million ultrasound studies. 125 million, the average cost being $800 million. This should be part of the physical exam. It would knock out 80% of ultrasound studies just by doing part of the physical exam screening. And then some medical schools have finally wisened up that this is the future. So here in South Carolina, also New York City, Mount Sinai, are giving the new stethoscope, the ultrasound device, to their students on the first day of medical school. But that's 2 out of 140 medical schools, so we have a ways to go. So let me just wrap things up as what this all means to the future of medicine. There really is unquestionably this medical revolution brewing. And the smartphone will see you now is kind of the tagline of this. The smartphone is getting a lot of power in terms of what it can do. I think I've hopefully shown that to you. And there's all these other articles, which I won't go over, that basically, you know, the avatar will see you now, the robot will see you now, the doctor will Skype you now, when your MD is an algorithm, all this stuff that capture what's going on in this quiet phase of a revolution that's coming. So you know you don't have to go to the dermatologist now if you have a suspicious skin lesion. You take a picture of that, go to a validated algorithm. Within seconds, you get a text whether that is suspicious or not. So you can preempt a lot of biopsies. You want to get your eyes refracted, use this $2 reusable device, attaches to the smartphone, and it texts to get your glasses made. Why would you go to an optometrist to get your glasses made? You want to have your child's ear examined because of a possible ear infection. Why would you go to an emergency room or urgent care when you can do this to yourself with an idiot-proof device that goes to the cloud with a 10 times magnified view and gives you an immediate response as to whether there's an ear infection? These are the kinds of things that are happening quickly, like IBM's Watson in the cancer space, because this big article in Fortune, as you know, IBM is putting all in on this Watson story, but it says, Ask Watson button provides a second opinion for oncologists, but as it grows more reliable, might it replace some of them entirely? So we have problems with doctors not getting on board. This is not such long ago an article in JAMA, and it says, should patients get access to their laboratory tests? Help me. It's their laboratory tests. And then we have the AMA that doesn't believe, lobbying hard the government, that patients have a right, consumers, to their DNA information without going through a doctor. And that's ironic because most doctors don't know anything about this genomic information. And we have doctors that are 70% still unwilling to give a copy of their office visit notes to the patient, even though the patient is paid for this and it's their office visit. So we have to get over the hump on these things. But you probably saw the Wall Street Journal, New York Times front page yesterday with the Medicare release of every single doctor's billing in the United States over the year 2012. And that was through very hard efforts of Wall Street Journal to get that data. But it's actually striking that we're moved to this era of transparency, where you can, on your phone, find out the costs or charges of virtually anything in the region and in the country through various different apps. And this is another really hot area of smartphone-mediated medical information, and a lot more companies have gotten into this area as well. So the other side of this is getting patients on board, getting them more activated and engaged, and that's happening as well. And this is, of course, the end result of all this is squeezing the doctor like never before. So I've been a physician and cardiologist for almost 3 decades, and I've never seen the squeezing that's going on right now. I won't go through all of these, but hopefully you've gotten a sense. When patients are generating the data, when there's all this telemedicine, retail-based clinics, online health social networks like Patients Like Me, algorithms replacing a lot of what doctors do, getting Yelped as a doctor, and all these other things. This is a really tough time to be a doctor unless the phenotype of a doctor can change from the analog doctor of today to the digital doctor of the future. So that's a really important migration, and that's why also the patients are migrating as well to this activated state, having their data on their devices about their medical condition. And it's amazing how many, the highest proportion of patients are very interested in converting to this activated state. What's interesting is you can order your own lab test now as a consumer. You don't have to go to the doctor. In 2 states, Virginia and Texas, this is legal. And there's companies that are cropping up to foster this. So you can just pick out what labs you should get, which of course could be dangerous as well, but it's going on right now, again speaking to the empowerment of consumers. Even kittens like their data, want their data, as you can see here. And so the mantra is, nothing about me without me. That's what we have to be thinking about in the future of medicine in this smartphone medical hub era. Let the patient revolution begin. Eventually, there will be a health spring because of all the things that are happening in this digital revolution. And so I just leave you with Icon. These are some icons from a very clever German company that I just saw. They had the icons for wearables, driverless cars, and other technical trends like the brain-machine interface, 3D. I came up with an icon for this era of medicine, and there it is, the doctorless patient. Not fully doctorless, but of course a whole lot less direct need to physicians in the future. And so I leave you with the thought that the future of medicine and health is really bright. In fact, it's the irony of the toughest time, healthcare economics, but at the most exciting time for potential advances in medicine. Thanks so much for your attention.
You mentioned it's really tough getting doctors on board with these new technologies. Historically, they're just really conservative, taking on average, 17 years from idea to putting it into practice. So for those folks out here that are looking to develop these new technologies and bring them to market, how do we speed up the process of getting these doctors and the medical facilities on board?
The best shot is the consumer base, because if the public outcry is, I demand this, and they're going to have an opportunity for that, it's going to happen a whole lot faster. They've never had that voice or power before, and that's altogether different. The other big thing, Kim, is the large employers. So I've been speaking to those employers that have 200,000-300,000 or more, and they are totally fed up with the cost structure and all the other problems that are embedded with our current health system. And they know that there's this new way. They know that you don't have to send a person, their employee, to a sleep lab for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a night when you can do it through a device on their smartphone. All these things, they're going to start to say, this is the way it's going to be done if you're an employee for this company. So those two things, the large employers and the consumer base, could really have a catalytic effect, so we don't have to wait. If we have to wait 17 years, I don't know. I think I'll have a heart attack.
It's interesting that you mentioned it's interesting you mentioned the large companies, because I was actually talking to the CEO of a medical device company that was telling me that's exactly where he is going. He's actually bypassing all of the medical facilities, going straight to these large companies that are taking the healthcare into their own hands.
Yeah, I think that's our only way out of those two. The health insurers are not really there. The government isn't there. You know, the doctors in the medical community and hospitals, they're just so stuck in their ways. So, I mean, there are some exceptions to that, but our two best shots are large employers, really large employers that have big-time purchasing power, and the consumers, if we can really get them to rally.
Really good to know. Our first question comes right over here. Over here.
Over here.
There we are. Bright lights.
Yeah, exactly. My wife is finishing her residency in internal medicine in 10 weeks. And I can tell you she has no context at all for the revolution that's happening on the IT side. She's been in survival mode for longer than I can count. But what kind of advice do you have for emerging MDs in this ecosystem, and kind of how to position themselves for the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think embracing all this is really critical. So that's why, you know, I think physicians want to support social networking, like the Patients Like Me concept, where each of their patients can get additional support through peers with like illnesses, and to be completely connected digitally to keep up with the latest, and that's best actually through Twitter of all places. So there's so many things I think will, the digital doctor, which has a lot of flexibility, plasticity, can be a whole new way going forward to, for example, respect of patient-generated data. The digital immigrant doctors think that if a patient-generated data, then it's worthless. Well, guess that's not true at all. So that's why I have all my patients generating data, whether it's their electrocardiogram or their blood pressure. And for example, in some health systems, they're training their primary care docs to do ultrasound exam from head to toe. So I would recommend every physician to get a modern stethoscope and use that as part of their daily practice. So that cuts costs dramatically. And then all these things, we can get into all the specifics, but for example, I go back to the sleep study. Don't refer patients to a hospital sleep lab. That's absurd. You can do that at home in the patient's convenience for free. So this is the kind of things that we should be thinking about, and all new physicians can get into that.
I think you're going to have a flood of new patients after this, right here from Silicon Valley. Our next question is right over here.
Hi there. So how much of a role does legal liability play in all of this, whether it's from the perspective of a doctor not wanting to share patient records or an insurance company that is worried about, making this system a little more transparent?
Okay, so the biggest change in medicine is going to come through these to the apps, okay, these adapters to the smartphone. So I ask you about medical liability. What do you read when you download the app? Do you read I agree? Do you read any of that?
So
that's the story on medical liability.
Absolutely not, I don't. And
Right.
I will buy all these devices probably next week. But what about the doctor's legal liability? And how much are they hampering the adoption by not being willing to get on board? Okay, so that's a different story. But the technology we're talking about, the person is going to basically waive that right when they get the technology. As far as a doctor, we still have that problem, and it impedes a lot of things that are done today are with the excuse that I have to cover myself for medical, legal, litigation, whatnot. But that's very much overridden if there's a great relationship of a patient and physician. And unfortunately, we don't have enough of that. We don't have enough exquisite communication. We still have 68% of American doctors who refuse to email with their patients. And a lot of that, the reason is I don't get paid, but another reason is I'm afraid if I write something in a note, I could get sued. And so a lot of that is just crazy stuff if you have a really strong relationship with a patient.
Are there guidelines that have actually been created to help doctors know what they can and can't write in emails?
Unfortunately, the guidelines are written by the American Medical Association.
Oh, wow.
And so they don't go to where we need to be, and other organizations. And the professional organizations, which largely, not completely, operate like trade guilds to protect their revenue, they don't want to change. And medicine is perhaps the most conservative of all professions. So these are some of the intrinsic obstacles that we have.
Do we have another question over here? Okay.
Hi, my name's Elspeth Murray. I'm the CEO of a startup company called Analytics for Life. Love what you talk about, many people in the room. My question for you is, how do you manage such change at such a scale? There's sort of the consumer end of things, but then you've got the physicians, everything that we've been talking about, and what is your advice to a startup company, especially as it relates to what we often do, watch the paint dry with some of these regulatory bodies. It's really tough.
Right. So the regulatory story is certainly suppressing this from really getting to scale. The analytics is the bottleneck here, though, with your area, because right now we have so much great stuff on the front end of collecting data, but we aren't too good about processing that and moneyballing that data. So that is a problem. And I think the scale and the real value, not just the scale, is predicated on far better machine learning, predictive analytics, both with respect to each individual, as well as the the scale of a population or cohort. So this is a missing link right now, and the great data scientists and computing talent has been largely not in the medical space. It's been in the likes of Facebook and Twitter and all these other parts of our economy. So hopefully, and this is the concentration in this region, hopefully we can switch that.
Another question over here, right here.
So my name is Ryan Floyd. I'm an IT investor, not a healthcare investor. And I see the opportunity, but what scares me is the regulatory issues. Technology moves so fast. You look what happened with 23andMe. Can you just comment a little bit more on the regulatory issues and really just from an investor standpoint, as we think about funding some of these opportunities, how that's really going to impact these companies?
Okay, well, I wouldn't want to use 23andMe as the exemplar because, they didn't communicate with the FDA for 6 months, at the same time launched a $5 million aggressive ad campaign that was touting things that the FDA had never really reviewed. So, in fact, the FDA, for these things we're talking about today, this morning, are very supportive. They've approved quickly the electrocardiograms, those devices. They approved the pill, the embedded digital chip pill. Pill has a chip in it, and they're close to approving a bunch of other things. So they are supportive of this, but you have to work with them. You can't just go out on your own, which happened. I mean, I'm a big supporter of 23andMe consumer genomics, but you also have to, play by the rules, and that includes communication and advertising with guidance. So I actually am optimistic that having spoken with Peggy Hamburg and several of the leaders at FDA, that they see the excitement like we do in this area, and they want to be supportive. And last thing about that is they issued a guidance document about their plan on a review, and they're only approving things that are reviewing things. Everything else will get automatically go through. Those that are really critical, like glucose and blood pressure, they're not going to be buggering things up by reviewing things that are really not important.
Another question, right here.
Hi, my name is Joaquin Reith, and I have a question with regards to how do you think, or commentary you have on how this will affect the pharmaceutical industry? Especially, there's a lot of articles I've read recently about drugs not being targeted for women specifically. And I'm curious, a lot of your discussion was about individualized medicine, and the pharmaceutical industry doesn't move very quickly, so I'd like to hear some commentary.
Right, the pharma industry tracks with the medical community. As you point out, Joaquin, very, very slow. Hasn't really pivoted yet, but it has to, because we now know that virtually every drug has important DNA interactions, and they're not even our own germline native DNA. It could even be our microbiome DNA that we've learned about. So learning about that and developing drugs in a targeted way is the future, and some companies are starting to get into that more. And there's, of course, when that occurs, there's not only a streamlined review, but there's the whole remarkable FDA support of that so-called breakthrough drug classification that's based on this hyper-personalization of drugs. And we're seeing that in cancer by genomic guidance of mutations and other areas as well, for example, cystic fibrosis. So this is the trend. It's just starting to happen now, and I think it's going to go into high gear.
Any other questions? Right over here.
Eric, what does this mean to med school? You said 55% are over 55. Nobody wants to go into it.
Well, I still think it's the most extraordinary profession you could ever imagine, and I think it's actually going to be far better. So what's going to happen, if you fast forward, within the decade, hopefully a lot sooner within the decade, a lot of the mundane stuff that doctors do will be taken outsourced to the digital world with algorithms and all these other things. And so doctors can get back to in this whole new, exciting relationship with patients where they're providing guidance and wisdom and experience and communication and empathy. That's what makes medicine exciting, is that bond, the noble profession of medicine, and what makes patients so grateful. The mundane stuff, which they not only can handle on their own, we don't, patients today are like, the Rodney Dangerfields, according to doctors. They just don't get any respect. We need to change that. And when we start to get to this information symmetry level, Pat, I think we're going to attract more young doctors, and they're going to be more. Right now, the burnout and the disenchantment factor is really high. I think we're going to flip that, and it's going to be, medicine's going to be more vibrant than ever, and patients, hopefully, are going to be happier than ever.
And if you have any more questions, we're going... One last one.
Will it shorten? Oh, med school could be shortened, no question about it. But you know what we need to do is revamp the medical curriculum. I don't know if you know how many years it takes to do that. But you see, to give all people 4 years of everything, you know, you can't even go into depth with the way medicine has grown, that body of knowledge. But you can tailor the medical education far better in those 3 years and do it much better. So yes, it could be shortened. And also the residency, the training, all these fellowships, they could be shortened too. But you can imagine there's not a lot of interest from the professional societies to shorten it too much, because that could bite into revenue of the practicing physicians.
One more question.
So,
right over here.
Based on my own experience, I mean, with emerging therapies and tests, one of the biggest challenges, even with consumer demand and doctor demand, is flat out insurance companies have a reticence or unwillingness to pay for it. So even if we see some of these trends as patients and doctors say these could be great things, where do you see, I mean, what's the current state of, you know, the major healthcare providers today of a willingness if the test, you know, I mean, it costs money at some point, even if it's lower. Is there a willingness on their behalf to embrace some of this, or is this going to be yet another pattern of, you know, blocking this?
What's fascinating is, I am shocked by this, but it's only taken until recent, like really the last year, where this has come to the fore. So, you know, the classic Stephen Brill, Time magazine, longest article ever published by Time, and then the Elizabeth Rosenthal, New York Times, Paying Till It Hurts series, which has 10 different parts of that series. Now it's brought to the public that, you know, we're not going to put up with this anymore. This is absurd. And I can't believe it took to 2013-14 for people to finally realize that they're getting ridiculous exploitation. That, you know, what costs the hospital $1, they charge hundreds of dollars to the patient. That can't go on. In this era of transparency, this is a short-lived, old story, I think. So I do expect it to change, because this is only new information to the public, and it's really absurd. And I can't believe it took this long. And
before you go, you have a new book that you are writing. Would you say a few words about it?
It's on the democratization of medicine.
Right.
So once you accept, and I don't know if I've convinced some or all of you that we're going to really get into the digital era, then the next thing is getting this available to all people, and to really have a new phase of medicine that I alluded to, which is the smartphone is the hub, which is so different, inconceivable. But it really comes down to how our world changed in that 10-year span with little devices, and how the same thing can be accomplished in the next era for medicine.
Right, a big round of applause for Dr. Eric Topol.
Thank you. Thank you.